that creates something you want to touch, but it's more than that, isn't it? There's soul in that. There's not just following the rules or getting it right, or it's almost transcending the craft skills that create that thing. Yeah.
Welcome back to Artfully Crafted. My name is Alienor, and each week I take you to a craft person's studio, interview them and show you their work. This week we're headed to the Welsh border to meet with embroidery artist Hanny Newton. I first came across Hanny's work at the Sanderson QEST Award, where she actually won the award for her work in gold and straw embroidery. So I'm really excited to share this with you because although it's very much a heritage craft, she has such a contemporary take on it, which I think will be really interesting. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button and let's get into it. Hi, Hanny.
Hi.
Thank you so much for... I was actually just about to say thank you so much for having us, but we're having you over.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And yeah, we're in a beautiful part of the country near, we're like at the border of Wales, aren't we?
Yeah.
Which is just gorgeous. So if we hear the occasional sheep, that's why.
Yeah, sheep and tractors.
Yeah, total stereotype. But yeah, we've got some straw and metal threads in front of us.
That's
so
right.
I feel like that begs the question. So could you tell us about what you do?
So I'm an embroiderer. I'm coming from a more traditional goldwork background. So I graduated about a decade ago with a real interest in metal threads. So traditionally that would be gold and silver, but as you can see here, I love working in like tin and copper and sort of questioning what other metals can be used. So kind of hand stitch techniques with those. And then more recently, which we'll chat about later, I've been introducing natural materials into my practice. So looking at straw, so this is rye, this is wheat, and how you can kind of, I'm interested at the moment in like natural gold and more sustainable materials and bringing those into my practice.
That's really, I'm really excited to really get into this because we've just done a little chat sort of so I've got a sense of where we're going to go, and there's just so much exciting ground to cover. So this is going to be good. Can you give sort of like an overview of like the different techniques within embroidery? Because you were traditionally trained at the Royal School of Needlework in Hampton Court, right?
Yes, yeah. So I studied the foundation degree there back in 2013, 2014, and that was, I think, 3 years into the degree existing. But the RSN has been around since the 1800s, 1870s. So traditionally, there's like all these amazing different traditional hand techniques. So for example, like black work and stump work and crewel work, there's silk shading and gold work. So all these different techniques that were kind of gathered by the RSM when they started back then and were kind of standardized, I suppose, in a way. So that's the place to go to kind of learn those, really traditional, quite historical techniques. Yeah,
because you're right, like the 1870s, I think you mentioned that's around the time of like huge industrialization, but therefore as a response to that, it's like the arts and crafts movement is about, starting to happen, etc. Is that desire to preserve heritage crafts.
Absolutely.
And I guess a little bit of what we're going through at the moment, right? It's like that realization of like, we need to hold on to those crafts and that expertise to preserve it for the future, right? So that's like the foundation of RSN, really.
It was a real reaction against that industrial period, the first kind of embroidery kits coming in, and the fact that embroidery, which obviously is great in some ways, was a lot more accessible for the first time, but it also meant that it was seen that there was a de-skilling of embroidery, and the RSN, as sort of an offshoot of the arts and crafts movement, was sort of started as a way to preserve those historical skills. Yeah.
That's amazing. So was it when you were there, like goldwork, did you sort of fall in love with that immediately?
Yeah, I did. I was always really drawn to the materials, and I think there's something quite unexpected about metal threads. I think you think of embroidery as a soft craft, really, as something that's seen as more feminine, that's textile-y, but then there's something about metal threads that moves it out of that. It becomes more sculptural, it becomes about the play of light.
I always think of sort of like regalia and like military uniforms and like quite like formal, splendid, like super ornate kind of thing. And as you say, actually like not soft, very structured, right?
Very structured. And I think it's very interesting that it's a type of embroidery that's always been like preserved for, royalty, for the church, for the military, for these sort of quite exclusive areas of society. And I think that's something interesting we can play with now and think where else they can be used, and how we can, these for example are tin, so how you can play with those materials and think of them in a different way. And I just found that fascinating. There were elements of it that I always found challenging, like it traditionally can be a very rule heavy craft, and very structured. There's a right and a wrong that's usually very contained, which are a few things that I like to kind of not have in my own work. So I guess I was drawn to the fact that it felt like there was a lot of potential to question it still and find different ways, whereas in other forms of embroidery there isn't such a set of rules maybe still, so it wouldn't be quite so much ground to question and push.
Because I guess the way that like nowadays a lot of like art courses, it tends to be like, yes, here's the technique, but also like we're trying to get you to find your own way, right? Whereas I can imagine when the RSN was founded, it would have been more that sort of like tradition of apprenticeship and like very sort of like disciplined approach to teaching, right?
Totally. Yeah, completely. It's the whole aim of the RSN apprenticeship, as it was, which finished just before the degree started. The aim of that was that a stitcher who was properly trained by them could stand up from, you imagine like a long frame that's being used with multiple people on for making like a coronation gown, which is, they're still made there. And somebody could stand up, someone could sit in their place and carry on, and it would look like one hand. So it's not necessarily about self-expression, it's about preservation of one way of working. But the degree was questioning that. The degree was like a new approach for the RSN.
That's really interesting. So you really joined at that moment where they were sort of like figuring out what directions they were going to go into, potentially questioning, relevant,
I suppose.
And potentially still questioning what to include or not to include, and maybe also how it can be applied, right? Because as you say, it's like, well, they're doing it on like the coronation gown, but you find embroidery in so many different fields, right?
Completely, and since then, I don't know what year exactly, but since then they've changed the name of the degree, and I think it now includes hand embroidery for fashion and interiors. So it's thinking of the wider world and the way that's changed, and kind of acknowledging career paths, I suppose.
So that sort of idea of like, okay, we're not just training people to then stay on and work for us. we're training people to then like take that and take it on their own path.
Totally.
That's really exciting. Thank you for sharing that. I hadn't sort of I didn't know about that sort of like change of path within RSN, and there's such a emblematic, like anyone who has anything to do with embroidery, textile, etc. Like, especially as so many courses have closed down around the country.
So true, yeah.
I think everyone that I come across who works in that field has at least done a short course or gotten one-on-one tutoring or some form of teaching from there. So they're definitely, just such a core part of that skill set.
Definitely, yeah. And it felt like a really exciting time because they were bringing in external experts, coming from, there's James Hunting was running the course then, and his background is fashion, and Cheryl Welsh, who was coming from a more sort of artistic background and worked in universities. So there were like fresh eyes on the RSN and on their kind of heritage that we're seeing it in a different way, and it felt really exciting, actually.
Quite disruptive, but as you say, in an exciting sort of way. I can imagine lots of like ideas flowing, and
definitely
it's like innovation meets heritage. It's great.
Completely. It was really formative. It feels like
the bedrock.
The bedrock.
And you then went on to Falmouth as well?
I did, so at that time, it was still a foundation degree, so 2 years, and they were just bringing in a third year to make it a BA degree.
Yeah.
So I had a sort of like crossroads where I could decide, do I stay? And, it would have been like the first year of this BA, or do I try something else? And I decided to go to Falmouth Uni, so that course is sadly closed now, but that was contemporary craft. So there was a textile degree there as well. So there wasn't embroidery on the contemporary craft degree. It was like woodwork, ceramics, glasswork. So I just loved the idea of like being amongst makers who are thinking about like broader questions about making and presenting, and it was a really special time, actually. It was challenging as well because people were viewing and talking about work, and the tutors had such a different focus to how we were looking at work at the RSN, and it was just switching, within a summer, suddenly being in a new context. But I think in the long run that was really helpful to realise that there are so many other perspectives. Like, I think especially that embroidery, you're like working like this and looking at something like this, and other crafts are not.
Yes.
They're looking from a distance when they're making, or they're making something, putting it in a kiln for 12 hours and then discovering it, whereas embroidery,
you control every element.
Yeah.
And that must have been interesting, I guess, because RSN, like, they were in that process of change, but it was still like technique first, right?
Yes, definitely.
Whereas you were then going into an environment where it sounds like you might have been the only embroiderer.
Yep, completely.
And so, then it's like, okay, well, actually, we're talking about creativity broadly, almost like agnostic of whatever your discipline is, right? So that's like a really interesting kind of flipping things and like forcing yourself out of your comfort zone, I guess.
Totally. And going from a place where, especially with the traditional side of things, it felt like within that universe, everything had been decided about embroidery.
Right.
To go to somewhere where people might have preconceptions about embroidery, but they don't, they're not invested in it. So it kind of had space in a way. But I kept coming up against the challenge of how long embroidery takes. I mean, all crafts are time consuming, but I think something like embroidery or weaving is especially time consuming. So what you can create for like a final show is very different. The scale you could be talking about than like a woodworker or So I think it's quite important to sort of come up against all those realities, I suppose, that if you just were amongst embroiderers, you don't see the broader context.
But so what are some of the preconceptions? I mean, so you talk about it being like super time consuming. What are some of the preconceptions that people have about maybe embroidery as a whole, or like even just like goldwork specifically?
Well, especially goldwork. So I've taught since 2015, and that's been a really important, sort of quite formative part of my practice since then, of like how I share that and how I sort of bring people into a freer way of working. And I always come across kind of people's preconceptions and people being a bit nervous, I suppose, that goldwork is very stiff and structured, that there's a very direct right and wrong, and if you don't do those sort of techniques in the right way, that things won't work or they'll look messy. There are certain techniques in goldwork that if they're not perfect, then it's very, very obvious. But I think that there's also so much potential, like if you let the materials lead, like I really love to work in that way, to get to know the threads. You know, when you're working with metal threads, they have their own tension, their own memory, their own way of lying and catching the light. And if you focus on the qualities of them and work with them rather than trying to sort of squeeze them into parameters, like a lot of goldwork techniques that maybe come from the military, for example, or from regalia, there's a very precise way of working that is perfect for the job it's trying to do, but it's not letting the materials dance, I suppose. And I think that it's exciting when you see people start to be able to loosen up themselves and find their own way of working. I really like that. So that's what I'm always trying to work out how to do for myself.
So, I mean, when you were 18, would you have ever thought that you would become a goldwork embroidery artist?
No. I never really made art when I was growing up. My grandma taught me to stitch, and I did little bits of embroidery, but it was never I never had like one burning passion. I loved baking and always liked using my hands and, you know, seeing things, creating things for myself, but there was no like, nobody would have ever thought I'd be a self-employed artist. No. It's that like we were talking about earlier when we were chatting, it's like that gradual following that path and listening to those moments that feel like it sparks something in you, and gradually sort of inching towards what's right for you.
So what point did you have that first moment of thinking, oh, like crafts is a career?
So I was working in a community with special needs kids, and it was really rewarding but super intense hard work, and I just started embroidering for my own sort of it's a bit of balancing, I suppose, really, and a bit of peace of
clearing
mind.
your mind.
It was just something just for me, and I loved it. And I was showing a friend some of the pieces I was making, and she said to me, "You do realise it doesn't just have to be a hobby. You can actually go study this." And she'd done sculpture degree in London, and it was like a real light bulb moment, because I didn't really know anyone personally who'd done that.
Well, you told me before we started filming that you come from a family of teachers and nurses, right? So
exactly.
You didn't really have anybody in your immediate family that was an artist, or
no. It's all very, very sort of separate, and it's not something
vocational.
And it's not something I'd dreamt of for myself until I felt that feeling of how much I needed stitch, needed something for me at that point in my life. Then I researched and found the Royal School of Needlework and was just like, I'm doing that.
And I think think that's something that's come up a lot in conversations I have with people, is that you need to know that it's out there to be able to like even want it, or to even be able to picture it, or you know. And so it's like, for me, like part of wanting to do this channel and these interviews is like putting it out there for, you know, young people to find, in a way. Because as you say, if you don't have someone in your family who does it already, you might not even imagine that it's a possibility.
No.
And so far with everyone that I've interviewed, it's been a real split between people who started on this path really early because they already did have someone in their family who was creative and who showed them the way, or people who, like you, sort of stumbled across it later on and were very much like led, you know, by their hands, but not always in a straightforward way. And who were like, oh, like it took me so long to like realize and have that aha moment.
Yeah. And for me, there's been sort of stages of that. There was the stage of discovering it and just feeling it in my gut and in my heart that it was for me. And then in a way, like the studying it was the easy bit. Because you're just like following your passion. You've got a real bubble around you.
It's the nurturing bit, the studying.
Yeah. And then there's been periods where it's just had to be me believing and working out how I start believing that I can make a career of it.
Were you taught how to deal with clients or anything like that when you were at RSN or
Gosh,
Falmouth?
no. And I would hope nowadays that unis are better, you know, a decade on. I hope people have more grounding, but no, not really. I left and I found it really quite challenging when I left, because it's like I've spent 3 years cultivating and nurturing my passion, but I don't know how I actually, and I know more than ever that this is me and what I want to do, but I don't know how to actually do it in the world. Like, how do you eat and do this? Like, unless you keep it as, I don't want to say hobby, but something that you don't rely on an income for.
Well, I mean, I remember, because I'm a member of the Art Workers Guild, and so as part of that, we have sort of talks every 2 weeks. And I remember one person saying, like basically they were doing all kinds of jobs around their artistic practice. And then their wife was the main breadwinner. And then it took until their mid-40s before they were able to give up all other sources of work and be able to like be fully reliant on their practice to contribute to the household. And it was like, wow, like that's how long it took them, you know. Someone who, and that was someone who actually like went straight into art school, you know, who didn't spend time figuring things out, who didn't come into art like later on, like they were at it from the beginning. And it took them until mid-40s to be like, you know, don't need to do a shift in a cinema or be a waiter or anything else, like they can just make. It's like that's, like, you need to have incredible, as you say, self-belief, staying power, determination. I mean, it's just
I this is a bit of a tangent, but I spoke to someone who's really experienced in the craft world and the gallery world, and I said to them, what traits do you see in craftspeople who have long running careers?
Oh, I love that. That sounds that's such a good question.
I was sitting next to him, just like a very fancy do, and I was like, right, what do I need to get out of this moment?
I bet they remember you.
And he said, first of all, they make objects that you just want to touch, that they're so exquisitely made. And then he said, I can't remember the third one. And then he said, basically that they just keep going. They just keep going.
No matter what.
Yeah. They just find a way. They know this is their path. Oh, the third one was they know how to tell the story of what they're doing.
So something that's tactile,
Yeah.
that you just really want to like engage with
Yeah.
and touch.
And
someone who's just got utter determination,
Mm.
and then the storytelling element, they're able to like relate themselves and their artwork.
And that first point is such an interesting way to put it, because you could say they are a master craftsperson or they are perfect at a technique, but that's not what that creates something you want to touch. But it's more than that, isn't it? There's soul in that. There's not just following the rules or getting it right, or that's almost transcending the craft skills that create that thing. Yeah. But yeah, I loved it when he said it, they just keep going, and I thought, okay, yeah, that's definitely me.
I mean, having spent just a little bit of time with you today, like I can see that 100%. Like that is super obvious that you're incredibly determined. Yeah. And so actually having felt very, sort of like coming out of your course and realizing that you had so much to learn about the business side of things, you then had, I think, like one was a dream commission, one was a nightmare commission, like both kind of taught you a lot about what it is to handle clients.
Completely,
right?
Yeah. But that was sort of 6 years after graduating. So in those 6 years, I was sort of mainly teaching, I was still waitressing, doing a few sort of interesting residencies on quite a low, sort of more local level, and not really sort of driving my career, I suppose, in the way I am now. I was more kind of...
You were finding your feet, right?
Finding my feet, and in the way that embroidery is slow. I think maybe my progression has needed to be slow at times, like just to work out who I am and what works for me. And so then just before the pandemic, kind of tail end of 2019, seemingly out of the blue, an interior designer got in touch and said, I've been following you for a while, I've got this project, would you be interested? And I obviously said yes. At that point I think I'd sold maybe one piece of work to a friend, but it was really mainly teaching. It was just like one of those sort of magical moments, I suppose. It really changed things for me in a lot of ways. So it turned out to be like a 3-meter big embroidery. It's a copper thread forest with 6 different trees. Like absolutely huge. And the biggest piece I've made before was like 40 centimeters or something. So,
oh my God.
Yeah. So it was one of those moments where it's just, it felt so clear that you just say yes. You either figure it out or it's a sign that it's not doable for you at that moment. But also like,
I think that is the magic of a good interior designer, and like what I would hope to be is like someone who can see what you're doing on a small scale and who has the vision to see what it could be, what you could do, and who's like gonna enable you, support you to create the best artwork that you could ever dream to make, and like give you the support and environment to like allow that to happen.
That's so true. And what was really striking, it was striking to me then, but now that I work with a lot more designers, what's really striking about that now is that she also, before she approached me, really understood what I was doing and the techniques I was using and what sort of projects she had the imagination for that was suitable for what I did. And she really took the time to match the craftsperson to the design in a really sensitive way. She wasn't just saying like, oh, make a trying to think of an example. I'm changing a bit of things I get asked, like, can
But she
you
wasn't
just,
asking
like...
you the impossible, basically.
No.
Because I think sometimes you can have, you know, you can have a designer who gets in touch and who's like, oh, like I've got this really, really exciting project. It's big, da da da, and then she explains it and you're like, oh, but I can't do that. Like, because X, Y reason, like my material just won't do that. And then you've had this amazing opportunity and project dangled in front of you and you're having to say no.
Yes.
It's quite heartbreaking, really.
And the designer's missing out on the opportunity to work with an incredibly talented person who has their own magic and could create something the designer couldn't create on their own.
Yeah.
And it's, I think that collaboration's really important. And it was the trust as well. She put so much trust in me. She must have seen something in me, and she put an awful lot of trust in me to make it happen. And I think at that point, somebody who like gave me permission, I suppose, to like smash down the wall of what I thought was possible, that you just wouldn't on your own, would you? Like, you know, the materials alone were like over $1,000, and, you know, it was 600 hours of work, and you just wouldn't dream that big on your own just for your own purposes. It's again a case of like, if you can't imagine it, you can't dream it. Whereas she like dreamt it for you. Exactly.
And gave you that opportunity, and then it's like, it's like creatively it's made your world bigger as a result. Hugely. Because you thought your sort of like field of maneuver was there, and actually now you realize it's there. And so all of a sudden there's like all of these new like possibilities artistically, creatively, that you're like, oh wait, I've done this, could I do that?
Completely. Yeah. But I think the hard thing was then, well, hard and also incredibly valuable thing was then that finished, and it was almost like, was that a mirage? Because then, you know, without that, I didn't at the time have like the infrastructure, the good website, the, you know, marketing plan, the kind of game plan, and the kind of vision, or, you know, and self-belief really, that I realised that was like a glimpse of what I want my life to be like, which is, happy to say, much more how it is now, like 5 years on. But it was like I then had to start from scratch and be like, how do I do it without like a fairy godmother coming along and like making it happen? How would I make it happen for me?
And so what's been, because you don't, I think it's one of those sad realities that you often don't learn from the happy stories. You often learn from the nightmarish scenarios. But you've since had some situations where like the clients haven't been so good,
Completely.
right?
And I think, I've had some really challenging, I think every commission I've had, I've learned and developed, but there's been one or two, especially one that was really, really challenging, that I can see that I was kind of taken advantage of a bit, as I obviously had enough evidence out there that I could make something of real quality, but it was probably clear that I didn't have an infrastructure around me, that I was still very new to it. And so, there was a lot of work done that was then sort of there wasn't a system. I didn't have any systems in place when decisions sort of came back and wanted changes, and it wasn't paid properly, and all these things, like so many different things, and it was really, really challenging at the time, but the best thing that could have happened, because it's again one of those moments where you have to just be like, I either learn how to handle this or I stop, because this is not
you can't have that happen again and again. No. And the fairy godmother's not going to turn up on her own every time.
No, and she hasn't again since. Which is really rude. So rude, She really has, like, there's no other client like that again, really. Like, I've had brilliant clients, but now it's professional relationships,
Yeah.
And it's one business working with another.
And
whereas
I think
that was
we
a
should-
different thing.
Yeah, and we should clarify, like, that with that particular commission, you were actually told there is no budget, and you just tell us what you're going to make, and then you make it, and we'll just pay you for however many hours it takes you, right? So it's like, that is extremely unusual, because actually most of the time an interior designer like wants to know what is the budget, because the client needs to know what the budget is. And then, you know, so you as the maker need to like be able to price yourself accurately, work out how many hours it's going to take, and work out like, you know, how many iterations of like sample development you're allowing for, etc. And if you do get any of it wrong, then, well, too bad for you. All of a sudden you've lost money. And that's kind of like what happened, right? But like...
Exactly.
And the thing is, unfortunately, when you're at the start of your making career, the getting it wrong is going to happen quite a lot. But then you're also at a point in your career where you don't have the financial buffer, because like... you know, you haven't had the opportunity to like even build it up, right? So
this is it. You don't have the financial buffer. You don't have, I don't know what the other way to say it, like community buffer. You don't have people around you. Like I didn't have anyone around me who I could say, like, you know, I'm.
It's not like you're part of a team and you can like turn to someone else and talk it out. And
I didn't really know other crafts, people who were working. I knew other makers, but I didn't know anyone, because it's pretty unusual to get into it in that way, I think. So it was all massively trial and error.
Yeah. I do feel quite passionately that like when people employ someone who is early career, you've got to make some allowance for like realizing that you're supporting someone and allowing them to develop their portfolio, and that you've got to allow a little bit of like room for error. And, you know, but like knowing that like you have that role of almost like being the fairy godmother, and like understanding that like that's quite an important thing, but also like you could potentially be the person who like breaks someone's career before it's had a chance to blossom. And I think often people can be quite, you know, they're just like, well, I'm the client, I'm right. And it's like, well... You know, if you're picking someone who's early career, I feel like there's a bit more responsibility than just I'm the client and I'm right, you know?
It's a really interesting point, and it's a meeting of different worlds, isn't it? When people contact me, and now I feel a lot more comfortable with it, but a few years ago people would contact me and they'd just expect me to have all the answers, like I was on Dragon's Den or something. And it's just not the reality. Like, it's an incredibly different thing when you're coming to it because it's your passion and it's something you make, and you do not know at the start who your clients will be, and you don't have any business experience at the start. So there were times it's quite intimidating when people just sort of expect you to...
Well, especially because if they're wealthy and, you know, they're probably older than you as well, because, well, if they're wealthy and then the position to be the client, quite often they are older, more established, etc. Like there's that sort of like power imbalance of like, you don't feel like you can put your foot down and like demand to be like treated in a certain way in the way that you deserve. But it's hard to when there's that power imbalance, right?
Yeah, and it's also like, if you're like not just walking down a path, but you're creating the path as you're walking on it, when you're a self-employed craftsperson doing something no one's really done in exactly your way, you don't know what's ahead of you. Like you don't know like what you need to know until you need to know it. And it's like you're the last... So
but you've got no hindsight, basically.
No hindsight.
Yeah.
So the last, from like 2020 to fairly recently, but you know, I know I'm going to be learning all the time forever, but those sort of 3-ish years felt like a second degree, I think.
Yeah.
But with no tutors, with no like...
But you did actually reach out for some like business mentoring, right?
Yeah, that's been hugely, hugely important. Yeah, I've worked quite a lot with Patricia van den Akker at the Design Trust. And that is like one of my biggest pieces of advice, is get mentors. Like, it changes everything. Like I think I used to think that you have to just work it out all yourself, but it's a combination of that and people who really can see more. It's that hindsight thing and have a bigger perspective and can see things that you don't. And it's like trying to steer the ship and build the ship at the same time. Like, and having, like people like Patricia and Veronica, who we'll talk about later, like mentors who become really close friends as well, and people that you can get really honest with.
Yeah.
Because it can be, I'm sure other people have said it, like it can be quite lonely and quite isolating, and what you have to go through to build what you're building is really significant. Like you have to sort of change something inside yourself to like build new beliefs and see yourself in a different light than you did like 5 years ago. And
you can't allow yourself to have limiting beliefs, because otherwise like the odds are so stacked against you that if you start with limiting beliefs, you'll never get anywhere.
No.
And that hard to undo that, isn't it?
Completely. And that was what I realised, like after that commission, the first commission, I started to listen to a lot of podcasts with like life coaches and things.
I've been doing that. Because I just get so much imposter syndrome, right? Like when I started this, I didn't have any experience like producing, interviewing, anything. And then, it's like I'm calling myself an interior designer, but I'm at the start of that journey, right? So it's, I'm assisting someone on interior design projects. I've worked as like part of a team that's like supplying for interior designers. And I've got my first like couple of projects that I'm doing on my own. But it's like all of it just feels like a whole load of imposter syndrome. And so, I do listen to these like life coaches.
Yeah.
It's like you need like the moral, like, I don't know, courage, or I don't know.
Yeah, completely. And you like you were saying, you have to, you can't, if you don't believe something's possible, like really believe that you can do it and that no one's coming to save you and do it for you, then you're never gonna make it happen. Yeah.
So you just mentioned Veronica. I feel like that's like the perfect, like, let's head there next. I feel like you've had a couple of aha moments already, but your next big one was at the Heritage Crafts Association conference.
Yes. Yeah. So the Heritage Crafts Association. So at their conference in 2022, I was demonstrating and teaching goldwork.
Yeah, so still focusing on this
still
side of
very
things.
much focusing on that. Like, so that was in Coventry, and metal threads are made in Coventry, and metal threads are an endangered craft, the making of them. So I was there sort of involved in that and teaching with these amazing threads that are made very nearby. And this woman who I'd never met before came up to me and just said, "You're the gold lady, you need to see this." And she handed me 2 pieces of this thread, which I had no idea what it was at the time. It's made of rye straw, and I'll tell you more about it in a minute. But I just held these 2 pieces in my hand and was just like, this is natural gold. Like, I don't know anything else about it. I don't know where it's come from. I don't know if I can buy this, if I can make it, if there's like, but I know there's something amazing about it. Like, if you look at the 2 ends.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see in this light. Can you see how different they are? So this end that I've got here, this is much thicker and it's much lighter. That is underneath the first leaf node. So it's been protected from the elements. It's the most sort of shiny, it's thicker, it's much more golden. And then up here would be the head of the rye plant. So it's much thinner, it's got a suntan.
It feels like wiry.
Yeah. So it's had to battle the elements, whereas this has been
like more lush, I guess.
Yeah. So I didn't know any of this. I didn't know why they were different, but I was just like, Oh my goodness, it's a gold thread that the sun has shaped.
It's funny though, because earlier you said, and sorry, you said this off camera, that the difference between these three is actually in the way they're spun and like the speed at which they're spun, right? And that's how you get the different colorings. But in a way, like that's also the difference in how it's spun. It's spun by the wind, right?
Yeah.
So it's all like, again, it's affecting the texture and the color.
The soil, could have had soil and rain and wind.
So straight away, it's that like similarity, almost in like an unexpected kind of way, like the way that the material can be affected by things.
Yes, and I love that. I love that you can be led by the material. Really, really interests me. I think there's something really humbling about that it sort of centres your craft sort of away from you, and maybe coming from the RSM where there was sometimes like right and wrong. This is very different, isn't it? This is like something quite humbling about a material, you know, that is so inspiring. I think that you don't need to prove that the back of your work is neat or that you've got the technique down well. You can, it's a different focus, and that's what I really love. And and it also just really excited me. I always felt like there was a little bit missing in a time where we are needing to think about how we consume things. You know, your metals are a finite resource, and they're not always ethical, and they're not easy to trace as well, where they're coming from and where the metals come from. And but the idea that you could, you know, use something that renews every year, that can be really low impact. I'm also now using meadow grasses that grow near my home. So, and like I was telling you off camera, starting to think about, ready for next autumn, working with a local farmer and growing my own, so that we can really, so the process is really joined up. So it's not just about a beautiful object that goes like on the wall, but it's about that deeper connection that I think we all need to think about in general. Like, we're so desensitized, aren't we? We go in a supermarket, everything's like packaged and ready to go and so convenient, and
you don't know where it comes from.
No. Yeah. You don't need to know what the plant looks like that a lentil grows on, or.
Whereas with this, if someone approaches you, like, you can say exactly where it's been grown, how it's been grown, what the environmental impact has been, who was involved in that process, whether they were paid fairly. Like, you have like full oversight from start to finish. Yes. Basically.
And then it becomes conceptual, I think, as well, which I really love. That it's about how something looks, but it's about so much more than that, and so many more conversations that you can have around that. And that I really love that about it. And in the way that the elements have shaped one end of the plant to the other, each year it's different. And I was telling this to he was a tailor, a Savile Row tailor actually, and I was explaining to him like the difference between, so this wheat's from 2023 when we had a really terrible wet summer, and you can see in places it's like quite discoloured, that it's got really damp. And then the year before that we had that heat wave, and that is like butter. It's like so beautiful. And he's like, oh, it's like champagne. And I was like, yes, I love that. It's like, yes, it's
just a Savile Row tailors on Sun and Metaphor based on champagne.
But I was like, I love that. And it's all these things, you know, that there's so much more to know, that if you just, you know, I love these threads, and I love the fact that I'm working with artisan thread makers, but at the end of the day, I write an email, I pay an invoice, and the threads come. But this, you're like, hopefully by the end of the year, will have had my hands in the earth, and it's that like way in to a much broader context that I think I really really love.
Yeah, it makes me think of, there's a company called Rush Matters.
Yes.
Where they actually like grow it themselves. And then they harvest it and then they treat
incredible,
it.
Yeah.
And then they like do the, was it like re-rushing and
like
caning and all of that.
It's
and that's
incredible
again, that's
stuff.
really cool to just have all of that. And again, when you talk about that storytelling element, like if the three things, like if one of them is the storytelling, you're going to have much more powerful storytelling when you can talk about the material like from its very beginning, right?
Yeah.
And you can tell someone that you've been involved in that.
Completely, and there's, I don't know how much detail we'll go into yet, or it depends how much time the farmer has. But there's one artisan grower at the moment, so you need to use heritage varieties because modern farming methods are all about efficiency, so things are as short as possible, and the stems just need to be like really sturdy, so they're not suitable
but you're
for craft.
using the stems, so actually you want the stem to be long, don't you?
I want it to be long, I want it to be supple. Imagine you're wanting to have that real flexibility to it when you prepare it in the right way. So you can't use just any old crop. So there's one artisan grower at the moment, and they're just growing one type of wheat. So think how many other types of wheat there might be that might be suitable, that might have different tones of gold. There's like a really old, ancient grain that we might be able to use, sort of, and the stories you can tell around that. There's someone I want to talk to who's a archaeologist who's doing a PhD at the moment in archaeology of grain. So the things you could link it to, and the ways the stories you could tell, and that's sort
amazing. So we've gone like sort of head first into the sourcing side of things. Can you just give me a little bit, like you mentioned briefly all the sort of different embroidery techniques. Can you mention different techniques that are linked to wheat, just to kind of give that overview?
Yeah, I'll give you like a very concise kind of context. So a lot of these techniques are linked especially to the hat industry. There's also overlaps with corn dolly making, but in terms of being made into a professional industry, which sort of happens in the 1800s especially, that is related to hats. A lot of it comes originally from plaiting. There was a big plaiting industry in this country, but all across Europe and around the world as well. The Swiss especially developed their own really refined set of techniques for more decorating hats, including these threads, but there's loads of different techniques. But a lot of it comes from a real understanding of your raw material, the right part of the plant to use, and how you prepare that properly, how you really understand how to turn it from something that's quite brittle into something that's really pliable and usable, and how you can then really, for me, innovate with that. But it all starts from a stem, which I really love, and then you can push it in lots of different directions.
So were there lots of different like types of ways of using the straw within the hat making industry then?
So the most common is plaiting. I don't know if you've come across plaiting much. So a lot of these techniques are really developed from plaiting, where you're taking a stem of wheat or rye, for example, you're splitting it with a splitter, and that creates these strips, and then those need to be smoothed, milled or flattened in some way. Before you do that, they're really brittle and they will just snap. I think, what people think straw will do, that it's something quite fragile, quite brittle, but once you prepare it, once you smooth it in the right way, then it becomes this really supple material. So within the hat industry, that would have then been plaited into sort of, plaits, from a couple of centimetres to something much wider. Then those would have been stitched together to create the hat shape. So if you see a straw hat, if you look closely, you'll see that it's usually a very old hat will be plaited. Yeah.
Do you need to add moisture at any point to make it more supple?
You're not wanting it to be soaking wet, but some moisture can help. It depends on the exact technique. A lot of it is about the right way of smoothing the inside pith of the straw. And within my embroidery, it really depends on. I'm sort of been for the last couple of years developing my own toolkit of techniques, and so that's what I love about it, is just like with the metal threads, even more so really listening into the materials. So depending on what I want them to do, some I won't need to dampen it at all. It's just about making it really smooth and pliable. Some I will dunk it in boiling water, so it will really soften it up very, very quickly, and I can make it do something very fluid. So it just depends. So I'm always aiming to be as low touch as possible to sort of do things that disturb the material the least that I possibly can, especially, if I'm thinking about the longer preservation of something, of the straw and the material. I don't want lots of moisture to be trapped in there, especially working in my cold workshop in the middle of winter. It's so, but that's like with any craft, I suppose. The more you do something, the more you get that material knowledge and learn what the material needs. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so, I mean, from that moment at the Heritage Crafts Association conference, and then you obviously now you do have a huge knowledge base on,
it's coming along.
But how did you sort of get that knowledge, and how did you go about it?
So I went home from that, and I didn't know what this was, but I just knew that I had to know. I knew that it was something really special. So I just started, like you do, Googling, contacting straw workers, asking to chat to them, finding out, just trying to understand what I was dealing with, and slowly piecing together the landscape. So, as I said, that there's corn dolly makers, there's hat makers, there's platters. Where does embroidery fit into this? And realising that there is an amazing history of straw embroidery. If you look on the V&A website, they've got an incredible archive of straw embroidery.
Sorry, literally every video someone mentions the V&A.
Really?
Every video so far. And now I just laugh to myself, it's brilliant.
Yeah, all goes
because the V&A was started to inspire British designers. And it's it's so amazing that it's every single person I've interviewed so far has mentioned the V&A.
That's really interesting.
It's that's probably, if I were to place a bet on the one thing people are going to have in common, no matter their discipline, it will be that something at the V&A has sparked inspiration for them.
Craft bingo.
It's so cool. I just it makes me so happy that museum is living out its purpose. What is it, 100, however many years later? I'm it's true to purpose.
It's incredible.
So it's really cool. But anyway, sorry, I started cracking up as soon as you said V&A. So you saw some beautiful examples there.
And it was realising, and they're all very distinct. They're sort of periods in time. The oldest is, I think, going back to the 1600s. So it starts to appear in very sort of distinct, separate, church settings for different reasons. So there's examples in France around, of embroidery, I assume in place of gold to clothe small statues at harvest time. I found a quote which I got so excited when I found it, of Goethe in the late 1700s, in his book The Italian Journey. He's in Venice and he goes into a church there and sees what he thinks is gold embroidery, and then on closer inspection he realises that it's straw, and it could be embroidery, it could be marquetry onto fabric, we don't know. And then when I looked up that church, they are Capuchin monks, so Franciscans who've taken a vow of poverty. So you start to see these like reasons, these conceptual reasons that people are using it, and then later in like the 1800s it starts to, there's a period where it becomes like the height of fashion, and you see it on ball gowns.
Really?
And yeah, it's amazing. Wow. Like a fairy tale, it's magical. Yeah. And so there's these like pockets where it starts to appear. So that's something that I'm really interested in working with a researcher at the moment who can start. Nobody's sort of made a timeline of straw embroidery. You know, there's obviously a lot more around the hat industry and the use of straw in that, but this is a kind of distinct thing, and there's so many questions like, where were these techniques coming from? Were they linked to the hat industry? Were they discovering it for themselves? Were they gold workers who were using this? Or, you know, some of it will be nuns who are applying things, or it's there's so much to know. So I was starting to sort of...
You fell down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Just this like massive... It's just so many questions and this big context, and then every person I spoke to, everywhere I turned, the same name kept coming up, which is Veronica, who's one of the like leading straw plaiting and straw industry experts. And
I should say Veronica Main MBE, right?
So she received that in 2021. I think a nomination from Heritage Crafts.
Amazing.
In light of her she has a most amazing story, and her career progression is just so inspiring. That's a whole other story. But so I plucked up the courage, and I'd always had as a sort of career goal that I'd have a QEST scholarship. So I'm sure that's come up in other ones of your episodes. But Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Trust, so a charity who support professional craftspeople to sort of develop their skills and keep learning and adding to their practice. And that's a real kind of like marker in the craft world, isn't it?
Well, you just know when you encounter a QEST scholar, you just know that their craft is just at a high level. You just know that they're likely one of the key players in their field, you know, and that they've had real access to expertise, and they're now in a position to be able to like innovate with heritage crafts. And so it's really, you're right, it's a real accolade, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. So I'd always wanted, like most people, you know, it's sort of a dream to have that you know it will help your career. But when I discovered straw, it just all made sense that was the right way to go. So
and that Veronica would be the right mentor.
Yeah. So I plucked up the courage. It took me a few months to contact her because I was just had a bit of imposter syndrome of like, why would she talk to me about this? Like, because it was like every path led back to her. In this field. And so I emailed her, and then she got back to me in like an hour, and was just like, had been waiting for an embroiderer to make that link between straw and gold. Really cool. And to look at straw embroidery and what it can do. And she's just... I've never met someone with so much passion for material, for heritage skills, for carrying those forward, and for them being taken seriously, for it not being a novelty, for it not being something that's purely hobbyist. Obviously that has a place and it's really important, but that recognising that a lot of these skills come from industry, not from being a pastime.
Yeah.
Whereas, embroidery is very different, isn't it, with the history of women embroidering, but these were survival skills for rural communities.
Yeah.
And she's just the most incredible advocate for those people, going back in time.
But I love as well that you say that her reply to you was, I've been waiting for you. Because it's, I think, as you said, like you were, sort of putting off getting in touch with her because you were worried. But it's like, yeah, sure, like there might be some people who'll say no when you reach out to them. But there's also going to be people out there who, like her, are waiting for an opportunity to like pass on everything we've learned and push someone else's practice to the next level. And you won't come across those people unless you like put yourself out there and ask.
Completely. It's so true. And I think because something about the way my brain works had just made that link the moment I held it, really. Like there's something we share in the way we love straw, like love the material and are excited by the material. That is like really genuine. I think that if there'd been a call out, for an embroiderer to train in straw, it would be very different to somebody like spending months Googling things and then tracking her down and forging a path.
And so you said that she's now been, so you did actually get this QEST scholarship. You were able to actually train with her and get some really valuable time with her, and she's remained a mentor, right? And
so
kind of opened up some doors as well.
Completely, yeah. So that was in 2023, and that was like another real dream career moment, getting that. And it's sort of like there's those moments like with the first commission, where it's like you can feel your world's like broadening up and like the horizon getting sort of larger, and that was one of those moments. And so I couldn't have done it without her. Like we were able to kind of build a dream straw embroidery training program, really.
Amazing.
So like working with her and started with her and learning a kind of like real toolkit of how to like order a sheaf of wheat or rye, how to prepare it, which parts of the plant to use, learning a little bit of like straw marquetry, spinning threads, and also just having her on my team, really, like the doors she was able to open up, which is really all come about through her like grit and determination and passion over like 40 years of like opening those doors for herself.
And then now she's opening them for you.
Yeah, and I don't take that lightly, like that they weren't open for her. Like there's certain people she wanted to talk to, without going into too much detail, that she bugged them for like 7 years before they'd share with her information, and she stuck around. And just that tenacity and how much easier that makes it for me. But it's easy not to acknowledge, isn't it, sort of why you have that access and that privilege. Yeah.
Oh, don't worry. I think you're giving credit where credit is due. You've been quite complimentary about her. I think the gratitude is obvious, but it's it's great to see, because I'm sure she equally speaks very highly of you, probably, and it's great to have that partnership. And it sounds like you can count on each other, which is it's like a meeting of minds, right?
I like to think so.
And so one of the doors that she opened up for you was with a museum in Switzerland, am I right?
Yeah, that's right. So the National Swiss Straw Museum, so it's right in the heart of one of the industries, historical industries in Switzerland. It I think the last hat factory closed there in the 90s, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, it has a really long heritage in hat making, but it started in straw. So I just had the most amazing opportunity to go there and study these archives from hat companies going back to like the 1800s and before. It was like fast tracking my understanding of what straw can do, like in a way that would have taken me years to work out. But it was like having these craftspeople next to me, like having days of this amazing access to these archives and just slowly understanding, you know, from by that point I had a basis of like straw preparation and understanding of what straw can do, but this was sort of showing the possibilities that were developed in the way that Veronica, you know, I'm standing on her shoulders, like this was like maybe 2-3 generations of makers, and seeing their progression and their works, which were largely for decorations for hats.
And you're able to sort of look closely at the technique through studying the archive, right?
So, and a lot of it is weaving. So then I'm kind of then translating that when I came home into embroidery and taking the kind of the essence of how the material is moving and then thinking of my own embroidery techniques into that. Yeah. Mm-mm.
Yeah, that sounds like such a fast track kind of creative period. And so did you spend quite a lot of time in Switzerland then?
No, I think I was there for 10 days.
Oh wow, for just like really intense.
Yeah, really, really intense, just like drink it all up, and then went home and spent about 6 months working out how to get to their level in the way they were working with straw. And
Had anybody else studied those archives?
No, not really. No. I think so. Veronica had looked at them. I think a lot more people look at them in terms of not the archives, but look at and are connected to the museum in terms of the social history. But yeah, it's like a well-kept secret, I suppose. And so it was amazing access, and it's really exciting. So hopefully in a couple of years' time, I'm just starting to work towards an exhibition there. So it feels like a real full circle moment that I'll be able to take back what that place has allowed me to explore. And hopefully it can be a kind of collaboration between me and these makers who really had very little voice and very little credit for what they were doing. I want it to have an element where it's about their technique and about, you know, if it's possible, working with the museum about their lives a bit. And so we'll see. So I'm back over there in the autumn, hopefully, and we can start to make that happen.
Map out, because that sounds quite exciting to have contemporary alongside historic crafts, and to just be able to like build up on that narrative.
Yeah, definitely, and acknowledge how important those heritage skills are, and skills that, you know, going back to the reason the RSN started, it's the same sort of things. It's why we don't know about straw and what it can do, is that it wasn't easily kind of translated into mass production. That if you're making a thread from linen, you can have like 1,000 meters or whatever of thread that can be spun in a, you know, industrial machine. This is the length you're limited to. You're limited to the length of your straw, so that's not easily used within mass production. So it became obsolete, and the world moved on.
And I have to say, like, you know, before we move on, because I feel like this is calling for us to talk about the Sanderson and QEST Award. But before we get to that, like, I just want to comment on the fact that, like, this, for me, you know, you mentioned the V&A, and then now you're mentioning this museum in Switzerland, and talking about how it's inspired you, but also like taught you by looking at these. And I think at a time when, as we've touched on, you know, courses are closing down and there's a lot of like, you know, specialists knowledge that's like at risk of being lost, at risk of not being passed on. I think it again sort of reinforces how key and really important the role of museums is in preserving those crafts, because you as a 21st century maker were able to go to that museum and bring back some of these lost techniques. And if the museum hadn't conserved those samples, you wouldn't have been able to. You would have been starting from scratch. Like you can only stand on their shoulders if the shoulders are there to be stood on, you know? And it's like, you know, you might, you know, Veronica wasn't there. You might have one day found, you know, come across that museum. It would have taken you longer in the same way that it took her so long. But at least it was there. But if we like defund crafts institutions and defund museums, like what are we doing? And
so true. These things really matter. This deeper connection to the why of things, not just about how something looks, but the context of it and the skills to make it happen. And
to have a record of that, because you also never know, as you say, like within the context of industrialization, it didn't make sense to keep using those techniques, but now it makes sense in the context of sustainability, and so you never know at what point something might become relevant again. And so to have that record and that preservation of it is just incredibly important.
Totally. And I think it's important to acknowledge that us as craftspeople do rely on the very highest end of the interiors sector, for example. And so I don't know about you, but I've seen over the last few years, a few times clients have said to me, handcrafted is the new luxury. And so obviously, like, you have to acknowledge the sort of privilege of that, and that you know, there's different, like, you know, issues with that, but still, just like back to medieval times where craftspeople are reliant on the upper classes and on the institutions, and it's the same now, and that those places are starting to recognise that handcrafted is set aside from machine made.
That it has sort of like intrinsic value almost.
Exactly.
So onto the Sanderson and QEST award, and that's kind of the thing that is hopefully going to keep, well, I feel like it has been propelling you forward, right? Can you say a little bit, because you finished your QEST scholarship, right? And then that sort of came up?
It was perfect timing, really, and QEST have been such a massive part of this whole journey. So my QEST scholarship took me about a year. So that was up until about kind of May 2024. And then around that time, the QEST Sanderson Rising Star Craft Award was announced. So that's the first time that the award's been run, with a really generous prize fund of £25,000. And when I read the description within it, it said like somebody who is like still growing in their career, but really innovating with traditional techniques and materials. And I was like, that's me. That's me. So yeah. So
feels like a real like cry from the heart. Like, so like candid.
And obviously I did not expect to win it, but regardless, you know, it's beyond a dream to have got it. It's the most amazing thing. But really, I think what I've come to realise over the last few years is applying for things when they're a good fit is an opportunity for you to understand better what you want and what your next steps will be, whether you win that thing or not. So I really used it to build a plan.
Right. And that plan was like, okay, this is what I will do if I win the award. But also, even if I don't win it, like these are still my goals, and how will I make them happen regardless?
Yeah. Because I was just sort of emerging, so to speak, from my QEST scholarship and achieved and more the goals of my QEST scholarship in like basically it was like, what is this amazing material? And like, how could I use it?
Yeah.
And through that time, like you've seen the tangents I've gone through in this conversation, like I would have had no idea of all those things. So it's opened up this broader context for me and the issues around it and ways that I'd like to take it, and how also I can, back to that thing of steering your own ship. So having the funds to not like wait for a gallery, but to say, how could I put on my own exhibition that could have eyes on it in like a serious way, and how can I create this game plan that gives a platform, eventually gives me like more room to like nourish what I'm creating, because this, you know, as you can tell, there's a lot of work in this, and like understanding the histories, understanding the materials, and also growing as an artist, and then actually making something good with it.
Well, yeah, because that's the thing. You're having to like, you're going away, studying archives, like gathering all of the information you need. There's like all the academic side, there's a sourcing side. But then, as you say, like your craft is a slow craft. So you need to then have time to experiment, practice.
Totally.
And then form, you know, what is going to be the synthesis of all of this? How do I put it all together? And then like trial and error, and then like generating the final pieces, like all of that is an incredibly long journey, and you need to like at every stage there's like something new to kind of digest and sit with, to then allow it to result into something.
That digesting and sitting time is part of the process, isn't it? Yeah. And also, I'm not in university, I'm not doing this full time, I'm running, you know, I'm working on big commissions, and I run an online teaching platform, and it's keeping those, as a self-employed craftsperson who's determined to have longevity, you have to keep those wheels in motion.
It's exhausting as well, unless it's fueled by just like complete, like all-consuming passion. You would just stop, wouldn't you?
Totally. But you have to also like consciously keep that alive, I think. I think like when you start working with clients, and over the last couple of years, it's, you know, really becoming more successful now, and I've got some really like big meaty projects. It would be quite easy just to go down that path, and I want to have a comfortable life. I don't know yet whether I want to grow and take on employees and expand, because that is definitely a path I could go down with interior commissions, but I still don't know yet. But I think that I need, like you were saying, to have this like thing, this why, this like, and for
purpose.
me, this purpose. And I think also like I'm driven by the novel and by discovering new things, and this is just full of that. There's still like so much to discover and to push and explore, and that sort of then allows me to work on commissions that hopefully will be like really stunning special objects that now go into like Michelin restaurants and yachts and hotels around the world, but the making of them is repetitive, and it's very refined, and it's very much about process and doing something very well and efficiently. But I couldn't do that if I didn't have this. It's like a playground, I suppose. Yeah,
and then it's also that thing of like, I think you've talked a little bit about feeling like you almost have this responsibility now of like you're like the guardian in a way of this craft.
Totally.
And you've got, you know, you've had like funding from QEST and support from Veronica, this amazing training at RSN and at Falmouth. So it's like you feel that weight of responsibility to like live up to it, and it's like you can't afford to burn yourself out.
No.
You just can't. And so it's like needing to like be ambitious, like sky is the limit, dream big. And at the same time, you've really got to look after yourself because, as you say, like it's just like a lot. It's overwhelming, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But so in terms of like what this award is enabling, like as you know, as is really, I think, apparent from our conversation, like there's quite a long life cycle to, like, for example, specifically the exhibition that you're like working up to.
Yeah.
Like it's a 3 to 4 year like cycle, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and the award has been, you know, one of the reasons that I always cited throughout the process of applying to it is that it would allow me to expand and to grow the work at a pace that allows for the depth of it, because I think that is like a real luxury and like a real privilege in a time where life is really expensive, and if you need to survive as a maker, you need to create a profitable product somehow, and this is not that at the moment. Like it will be, but I if I was to immediately create that, I would miss
part of the potential, right?
Yeah, part of the potential, but also that honouring part, like the acknowledging the depth of skill of makers of the past, of people like Veronica, that you don't necessarily get to do if you just have to, like, you know, in the current craft system, like leave uni and very quickly find your style and just make something that sells.
And how do you feel about, because I mean you're clearly like at the very edge of innovation within your field, right? And so as part of being a maker, you're constantly having to like promote yourself, share what you do behind the scenes, how you make it, etc. Like, because the making process becomes the marketing material for you in the same way that like this video will be part of like storytelling, marketing, and like putting your work out there. But at the same time, like, because you're innovating, like there's wanting to like protect some of that. Like you don't want to be like copied before you've had a chance to like fully put your stamp on it and work it out yourself. And then also if you're working towards an exhibition, but it's like over 3 or 4 years, like you want to be able to like unveil, and for that unveiling to be exciting, right?
Completely.
And like retain some element of like unseen before. Like how are you dealing with that?
So I'm sharing the things that, I can't think of a better way of saying it than like entry level, the things that I discovered first, that other people could have discovered, you know, as I discovered them. So the threads already existed. I think it's quite like, obviously I hope to be using them in a very skilled way, but it's still something people could pick up and try if they discovered it as well as me. You know, I haven't invented these types of threads, so it's more sharing, because I think that regardless of the technique I'm using, the materials are mesmerising to people, and the few times that I've exhibited or demonstrated so far, I can see there's so much going on in people's heads. Like they're looking at the work on the wall and back to this, like I like to take wheat with heads on and have it on the table, and they're like looking at this work on the wall, then like back to the wheat and looking, and it's like it's
they're
like
joining
ignites,
the dots.
it like ignites something. The materials ignite something in people, but I know, and I'm thinking, you don't know how much more there is to like show. So it's and as you know, you need to. It's a tricky balance because you need to stay relevant and you need to stay in people's minds. And I want, by the time I get to an exhibition, it not be like, who's that having an exhibition? I want people to be like, oh yeah, Hanny Newton has been working. We know she's been working towards that. So it's a balance. I think there's an element of like trust. There's an element, I think, I wonder if you come across this with other craftspeople, but you sort of forget your skills sometimes. So you sometimes, like, I have to remind myself, even though I can do something, it doesn't mean everyone could just pick it up and replicate it. So it's
Yeah,
sharing
you're right.
elements. It's like sharing elements so that it's captures that storytelling, but keeping a lot of the larger work back, I suppose. Yeah, I don't think there's an exact science to it.
No, it's like you're kind of trying to like share little glimpses to like generate excitement.
Yes.
But then at the same time, like you're not just wanting to generate excitement from buyers, but you potentially want to generate excitement for like future generations of craftspeople that like there's so much more to do with this. And you don't want to be copied. But at the same time, it's like, well, how easily could someone really copy you? Because they don't have, you know, how many years now have you been training? Like if we count like from RSN, like through all of the different with like the QEST scholarship, that's
2011 like, till now,
That's like PhD levels of...
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Know? So you could put something online and actually like, you know, there's probably only a handful of people in the world who would be able to replicate what you're showing.
Yes.
So I guess it's a fine... Yeah, it's a fine line. It's a tricky balance to keep. But...
It is a tricky balance. And you also, if you are too worried about that, then you wouldn't breathe. You know, you have to kind of...
You can't be too anxious.
No, like I'd miss out on opportunities like sharing with you today, and there has to be like a little bit of trust, like in myself and in the direction I know that I'm going, and like how much I've put into it, and kind of good luck to someone who's like willing. Like I think anyone who'd be willing to like put the same amount of years in wouldn't, by that point they'd forget they were copying me.
Yeah. One thing that you said you would like to talk about, and I was glad that you said so, was like the financial pressures of being a maker. And obviously, as we've just said, you know, that Sanderson Award has enabled you to like plan in a way that you might not be able to. Yeah. You know, otherwise you'd have to like fuel that dream in a much slower, you know, with a much longer timeline. But you have also had to make some personal sacrifices to like make this career feasible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And firstly to say before we move on, like what QEST and Sanderson have enabled with this award is huge, and it's like puts me at a massive advantage, like having that vote of confidence, that increase in status, that money, that sort of space to really take up space with it all. And I think especially in like 2025, like that is a real luxury. Like as somebody who doesn't have you know, a wealthy family behind them, or a wealthy spouse, or you know, that I'm sort of working it out on my own, that it's really adds so much. But it's also, I was already kind of for the last few years creating the environment where I could make those things happen. So when the first commission happened back in 2020, lockdown happened at the same time. I was planning on making it at my dad's out in the country, and then suddenly thought, actually, if I'm really gonna engineer this life I want, I need to stay here. Like I was waitressing before that, I was renting my own apartment over in Shrewsbury, and so I realised, you can't, I don't think you can do something like this without creating the right conditions and deciding there's choices to make.
So you had to sort of take a step back personally in order to take a step forward professionally.
Completely, yeah. And I think, like you were saying, how if somebody takes on a junior, they have to leave space and sort of give permission for that person to be learning and to make mistakes and mess up. I sort of had to allow that for myself, that the last few years have been like looking very in like the cold light of day at the gaps in my own knowledge, in my own confidence, and how to fill those, how to do courses like I was talking about. The Design Trust are just invaluable, the support they give makers and the courses that they put on, and and just putting in the work to learn. You know, if I was trying to, like I was before, like waitress and keep up my practice,
you wouldn't have had the time to be able to do all of this.
No. You just wouldn't. And also, if I had children as well, you know, there's you have to sort of acknowledge, I think, the situation you're in and the privilege of the decisions I'm able to make in that way. So yeah, it's enabled me to sort of create, to sort of build brick by brick the world that I want to inhabit, I suppose.
Yeah. And so do you make a living?
Yeah.
Fully from, you still do teaching, right?
Yeah, so I set up my own online teaching platform. I set that up in 2023, and that came, I've been thinking about it for a while, but I had a really large commission that would have been like more than I'd made in one commission that I'd made in like 2 years of, you know, income ever. So it's huge. And I sort of got a bit complacent, like, here we go, yeah, this is working. And then just overnight that just disappeared.
Right.
And again, it was really good thing that happened, because it made me realise, like, I think there is great potential in the sort of big commissions that I work in, but it's a long, slow process. And some things, like I'm working on one now, that we're just in the sampling process, about to move hopefully into production for a huge project for a yacht. That's been in conversation since 2022. So things take years, don't they?
Yeah. And if you've been like hoping or relying on, oh, this is going to come through, then you've been waiting for 3 years. And it's like you can't plan for that to be coming in, because you don't know when it'll come in.
You can't. And they're not your fairy godmother. They're like, once you've signed a contract, then they are responsible for adhering to that. But before that, they don't really owe you anything if you haven't done any work, if they haven't paid you. And yeah, so that was like a wake-up call, and I realised I need to have my own income streams so that when these projects come in, I can take them on my own terms. And then I think it makes me bolder and able to set my prices at realistic prices, so I'm not like working in conditions that would cause me to burn out or not be able to keep the straw work going, because I'm just having to work really hard. So yeah, I set up an online teaching platform, so that's still with metal threads at the moment. And yeah, that allows me to reach like my niche but worldwide. So that's been amazing. Like again, really hard work. These things don't come easy, and having to learn how to like film myself and market myself, and you know, create the platform myself. I have a video editor, but apart from that, I'm, you know, at the moment doing it all me. So but it's meant that then I'm not relying on one thing, and I think that that's really important as a craftsperson at kind of the beginning of their career. Yeah.
Do you think that you're getting to the point where you might be able to move out of your family home, like financially?
Definitely, yeah. I'm there now. So it's just sort of taking that plunge really, and realising that it's going to be an adjustment. So yeah, me and my partner really want to this year, and it feels like the right time. And again, like that idea of like your horizon broadening, and I think I've needed this time. It's felt like very, some ways quite insular, like in some ways a bit of like a wilderness time of like sort of having to like dig deep and like reinvent sort of like myself.
Cocoon and crystallization stage, and then now you're like spreading your wings, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I need to, it's time to like be brave and take the plunge, I think, soon. But yeah, I couldn't have got here without that. And at times I've found it challenging to kind of own that I live at home, because I think there's so much around the image that you portray and what your clients would think, or trust people would put in you if they're
like, oh yeah, can I visit your studio? And it's like,
Not right now.
Yeah. Like I live at home, and then they're like, wait, how old are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's really tricky, but I think you're right. It's like it's important to acknowledge that in the world of crafts today, most independent craftspeople either are older, and therefore when they were establishing themselves economically, the situation was very different, or if they are sort of like in the younger sort of generations, they most likely have either like family money, or it's their partner who's supporting them, or like you, they're maybe living at home and they have that support in another way. Or, you know, maybe they've been incredibly lucky with like super cheap studio rent. Maybe like they've come across someone who's very like benevolent, or maybe they've been like extremely lucky with funding, but that's like extremely rare. But like there's usually some form of something along the way. Like it is, I don't want to say it's impossible, because I don't want to, you know, part of the mission of this channel is also like wanting to inspire future generations, and it's hard to inspire when you're also saying it's financially difficult and impossible. But the truth is, like, I don't think I've really met anyone who's not making some kind of sacrifice, or who doesn't have some kind of support. And, you know, the sacrifice can come in even like postponing starting a family, because as you say, like that's another thing. So as much as I don't want to discourage, I also want us to be like honest.
But I don't think it's discouraging as such. I think that, I don't know about you, but I think that craftspeople tend to be of the ilk that they're doing it because they have to. There's something in them that means they have to. And I think that dispelling that like lovely image that you see online, often, because that's what you sort of have to portray to get somewhere, like for people to understand who are getting into it, what it takes, and that, just like me hearing you say that you see that with craftspeople, like that makes me relax and be able to like own it and think, right, so how do I work around this, rather than thinking, what am I doing wrong, or how, you know, there's still times where I think like, am I missing something here?
No.
Or and it's
you're not missing anything. That's just I'm genuinely more and more convinced that that's just the reality of crafts, like at this moment in time, because of the external pressures, because of the cost of living, because of the situation politically, and like God knows, like, you know, the American market is a big market for craftspeople. And obviously there's a lot of stuff at the moment that's quite like, you know, whenever there's like political uncertainties, then people tend to not place orders. Like the luxury sector is the one that tends to go first. And as you said, like crafts and anything handmade is now considered part of the luxury sector. So it's like, if people don't feel confident in being able to spend money, then actually that affects people right down to making. And then when there's not that stream of work, then it means that like crafts might disappear because the next generation isn't being trained, the funding isn't there. And so, it's not you. It's how things are at the moment.
And the more that the earlier you understand that, and the more you can then think, well, what does that mean, and am I willing to make those sacrifices? I think, the more people can be realistic and actually take control.
But I mean, throughout this interview, I think there's been so many moments where like you've just been sort of like, not in a trance, but like you've been sort of like smiling. You're like, exactly. Like your face just like lights up when you're talking about straw. And I'm like, you know, do you feel like those sacrifices are worth it?
It's like, for me, it feels like self-actualization. It feels like the process of getting to who I am, I suppose, and like unraveling my potential in a way that that there's like, if Hanny of like 3-4 years ago watched like this conversation. They wouldn't believe like the ways I've grown and the things I've done and the things I'm about to do. And I think it's all of that. It's about having that passion about the materials, but it's also about following something that's true to you, but completely like against what you're taught it's supposed to look like. And I think we're so much more capable of like, and stronger and like able to create our own realities than we realise. Yeah.
So last question, what is, I mean, I know you've got some really big, exciting projects coming up and you've obviously already had the experience of a dream commission. But if you think beyond the exhibition, if you think more of like private commissions, what's your next dream project that you'd love to work on?
I would love to have a residency somewhere where I'm given like time and space to immerse myself in like a natural environment where I can respond to that, use those materials, where there was space to breathe and not be juggling as many balls as I'm juggling all the time, and to really be able to create a piece of work, a body of work that responds to a place, to a time, that allows me to really like put into practice everything I've been working on with straw, and to see where that could go. Yeah, and I really love to be then exhibiting and share, you know, have projects like that are then shared and open up the dialogue and the sort of conversations we've had today, and share that in a bigger way, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been such an inspiring conversation, well, for me anyway.
It's been great.
And yeah, I hope some of what we've shared will resonate with others out there. And I really look forward to whenever the exhibition starts to be sort of promoted, I look forward to seeing like what direction you've gone into.
Yeah, it'd be great to catch up then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hanny.
Thank you. Thanks.
I've linked Hanny's website below, and I can't wait to discover more about her project as she unveils it over time. Please don't hesitate to leave any questions below. I'll do my best to answer them or get Hanny's input if I can't. Thank you for watching. It means a lot, especially as at the moment this channel is entirely self-funded. So please spread the word. Like, share and subscribe. See you next week. So something that's like tactile. Yeah,
exquisitely
something
made.
That's exquisite, that's tactile.
They've
oh my God, why am I struggling with this? Is going to be the blooper every time. It's me stumbling across something, making just a fool of myself.